Hello and welcome to the penultimate big game preview podcast of the 2025 Guinness Men's Six Nations Championship as Ireland and France once again lock horns in a game that will probably be billed as a probable championship decider. It's going to be in Lansdowne Road, Dublin. It's going to be lots of people at it. I don't know about the people in front of me. I'm joined by three returning guests in Munster fan Eric Fitzgerald, Connacht fan and podcaster Pádraig Kelly, and of course, as always, for an outside perspective, we have French rugby journalist Illtud Daffyd. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Ilton, let's start with yourself. Back on to talk French rugby, but more specifically, I'm not going to call it a nouveau crunch for the whole thing, but for the purpose of the first question, to use Jerry Thornley's terms, this feels like a Le Crunch in certain ways. It's the third straight title decider between these two teams.
Yeah, definitely. I think we need a new name for this game. Low crunch, O crunch. I don't know. We'll see. Something will come up, I'm sure, over the weekend. But yeah, this is a huge game. I think Pádraig Kelly spoke on Thursday after his team announcement, saying he realised how big of a challenge it is to go to Dublin. He Out of the blue, he picked out the stat that Ireland have only lost twice since 2019 at home as well. So he realises how big it is, and I hopefully the 52,000 people going to the game realise how big it is, and probably the 20, 30, 40, 50 million people watching across the world will also realize how big was it. So yeah, this could be a cracker.
It promises to be that way. As always, we'll run through the two teams, where we see it being won and lost, big selection decisions, and all that. And as always, we will start with the Irish 23, which sees the return of the 6-2 bench split, returns for Joe McCarthy, Hugo Keenan, and Bundy Aki into the starting side. And all three impending international retirees are included. The side and the full 23 is as follows. At fullback, it is Hugo Keenan. On the wings, Jamie Osborne and James Lowe. Robbie Henshaw and Bundy Aki form the ex-Connacht centre pairing with Sam Prendergast and James Gibson Park at half back. Andrew Porter, Dan Sheehan and Finlay Bealham are once again the front row, with Joe McCarthy and Tyke Byrne. And in the second row, Peter O'Mahony, Josh van der Fleer and Finnegan captain Caelan Doris make up the back row. And on the replacements bench, it is Rob Herring, Keane Healy, Tom Clarkson, James Ryan, Jack Conan, Ryan Baird, Conor Murray, and Jack Crowley. Park, I'm going to start with yourself. There's a few changes in there from Ireland. There is that new bench split and all that, but what catches your eye straight off the bat?
I think the big call to me, especially if I've been like online the last couple of hours, like seeing what people's opinions are, and for me, it's the call of Baird on the bench over Nash starting because that's the 6-2 over 5-3. Like it's not Jamie Osborne over Nash; it's actually Baird on the bench over Nash starting and Osborne in 23. I think sometimes people get very focused on one position, like that person is taking that player. Goes, no, you got to look at the full structure of the 23. That's the big call, like in Ireland going, or the 6-2 split. Jamie Osborne starting makes more sense because he adds that flexibility across the back line if there's injuries and things like that. The other one for me, and I think it's a big thing, is Rob Herring on the bench. Ireland have gone for that experience where they can because of how big this game is. Um, I think him coming on whenever he does manage to come on will have a big impact. His set piece is extremely solid, and I think that's what you'll need against this French team. The big thing for me with Osborne starting is we're going to see an incredible game of kicking effectively between both teams. France like to kick long. Ireland like to kick long now. We've been changing over the last like 18 months to a bit more kick focused of a team. I can see I think we're gonna challenge them in the air a bit more, but we're definitely want to kick into the French 22. And you have a cannon in Osborne, a cannon in Low. And if Sam Prendergast has any time at all, his kicking game will keep France in their half and as near to their own 22 as humanly possible. I'm interested about when and how we'll use our bench because for me, I would have preferred to start Ryan over McCarthy. I think McCarthy, as he's a bit of a loose cannon, I think he can give you that energy off the bench, whereas I think Ryan's a better starter. Conan, he's been performing incredibly well, but I think the big thing in that whole 23 is Doris back starting. He does so much. Like he might not be the flashiest player in the world, but he almost is a gel that makes that pack work so everyone else can do their thing. O'Mahony just makes sense. We have guaranteed line out ball with him there, and we can pressure the French line out a bit more as well. But overall, I think it's the strongest 23 we can really effectively put out in what will be an incredible game. I actually just want it to start now. Like this is the game of the weekend, and that's a 23, that's a 15 to 23 that can definitely cause France trouble. Um, but I honestly couldn't say who's going to win by how much, because there's just two good teams here.
Well, hopefully we manage to convince you one way or the other of the next like 45 minutes or whatever. But I personally I do agree with most of that. Like the McCarthy one, for instance, is one that I would have no problem if James Ryan started, for instance, and in the second row, Rob Herring is one that catches the eye. Illtud, I'm going to throw it over to you though for the opposite side because we could be a judge to be viewing things with a provincial lens. I don't think we are, but we could. It could be said from your perspective of that Irish 23. What jumps out? Is there anything that you think, even in particular, France could get at in that Irish 23?
I think what jumps out ironically is the shortest surname in Bundy Aki, 3 letters. It's enough to scares you a bit if you're gonna have to defend against it or even attack against him. He had such a good performance in the last 25 odd minutes against Wales. I'm sure Sean Edwards will have done a bit of homework on Aki this week. And yeah, like across the board with France, with Ireland, they're impressive, but Hugo Keenan could be key as well, considering how good he is in the high ball and how potentially poor France can be in that section of play. So yeah, Aki and Keenan in the forwards. Doris is a huge boost, isn't he? Especially considering Gregory Aldrich was injured in the week as well, and there's doubts over him playing. So yeah, it's although it's probably from a French perspective, it's a bit frustrating to see Doris playing. It's probably, as a neutral as I am, it's quite nice to see Doris going up against Aldrich.
It's been a fascinating matchup before, and I think Eric and Pádraig, you were both there as well for the 2023 Iron Cup final between the two, and it was a proper tete-a-tete. But Eric, I'll bring you in on this one. Ireland, look, we discussed this there yesterday between the two of us on WhatsApp that probably not as good as some pundits would make you think they've been. They've been grand. They've gotten over the line. That's all that matters. Probably a little bit reactionary of a team sheet though, going 6-2 because France went 7-1. Going with Osborne because they might be thinking, we need that extra midfielder potentially for Ringrose out. What selection decisions catch your eye in terms of how you see Ireland going about this game?
I think the biggest decision that catches my eye, and here's my hot takes versus the two lads' is kind of measured analysis, is I don't think Hugo Keenan has had a particularly good tournament. And I think what has worked against Hugo Keenan is the reinforcement of the escorting laws. I think Hugo has been excellent under the high ball, largely when he's had two escorters in front of him, and that has always been like such a key characteristic of his game. Not to mention that he's an excellent defensive positioner. But whether it was just the extended off season for him when he played in the Paris Olympics, or whether it was the reinterpretation of the laws, I don't think he's looked the same player as he did maybe in the last two seasons previously. And actually, if I was to look at that back three, I think the call I would go is rewarding Osborne's fine showing against Wales in the fullback jersey with the start at fullback and starting Calvin Nash on the wing, because I think Calvin Nash is another player who's very, very solid under the high ball. I think what we lack in that back three as it's selected is a real kind of like out and out speedster on the wings. I think, but I think as Pádraig rightly pointed out, like Ireland are now an off-ball team. We are not an on-ball team, and the goal of our back three, largely, particularly within our own 22, is going to be to kick the leather off the ball. And that's where Lowe, who has one of the best left pegs in the championship, is always worth a punt. And like I would have definitely seen James Lowe in this 23. And I think that's precisely the reason why we've picked Jamie Osborne in that back three as well, because we trust his kicking options. And that's not necessarily something that a player like Calvin Nash affords you. Like there was some talk around camp, particularly when Nash went off at halftime holding his ribs against Edinburgh down in Musgrave Park. That perhaps he was injured and that perhaps influenced the selection call. But Easterby was very clear, like Nash trained fully during the week. That it was a kind of a selection call over a fitness call, which is interesting. I think the return of Doris to the back row kind of provides something of a balance that maybe was missing against Wales. And I think of all of the retirees, I think Peter O'Mahony has earned his place, especially after having not started against England, coming back and performing really well in the subsequent two games, where he started against against both Wales and Scotland. The one concern I do have though is our substitute front row. And I think in particular, I think that our starting front row are going to all play 70, if not 75 minutes, if we can get away with it. While definitely Keane Healy over Jack Boyle is the right call in terms of experience and just being able to deal, like it would be very unfair to throw Jack Boyle in his second cap to come off the bench to face either Antonio or Aldegheri. Um, I just worry these days about Healy's just fitness and his general mobility around the pitch. I would have the same concerns about Herring versus the likes of Gus McCarthy. Was Ronan Kelleher injured that he missed out in the 23? Yeah,
He
he
is,
Yeah.
yeah.
was. Yeah,
He
he
got
was.
injured in Murrayfield, I think.
Yeah. Even, you'd worry about him over the likes of a Kelleher or even a Gus McCarthy. And I just think, unfortunately, with Tom Clarkson, like he had a horrible day in the office the last round against Wales. And I think it would be even tougher for him coming on against either Grow or Boy off the bench. So I think in terms of like where I see the big selection calls, I think the back three and I think also the substitute front row for Ireland are the ones that would cause me the most nerves.
And something that I kind of had forgotten there until you mentioned it, but like the fact that Caelan Doris hasn't really trained too much in the last 2 weeks. Obviously, Gregory Aldred has been injured. They're not the only ones, but Simon Easterby made a point, or sorry, not Simon Easterby. John Fogarty made a point of saying during the week about Tyke Furlong, but I think this applies for a lot of players that most lads aren't 100% fit, which is true. It's the Six Nations, it's Test rugby, but you do wonder how much of a kind of silly beggars is there between Doris and Aldrich in particular, because they're the two guys that neither team can do without you. As good as Conan has been, O'Mahony, Van der Fleer, Conan versus O'Mahony, Van der Fleer, Doris with Conan on the bench, it's a very different prospect. And especially, I think Ireland don't go 6-2 if Doris isn't there, for example. If he's ruled out, I think they go with an extra back and they don't risk it, as we've seen for the Wales game. Park, I might just throw it back to you because, as Eric said there, there's a lot of talk about that Irish set piece, as there has been since what, early 2023, late 2022 or so. It's going to be decisive, and like Finlay Bealham and Andrew Porter have done really, really well, but this is undoubtedly their toughest matchup yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think the big thing for me when I'm watching Porter is not how he gets the upper hand. If he feels he gets the upper hand, he chases scrum penalties. And I think for this match, he'll have to just lock out. Because I do think he's actually stronger than most tight head props he comes up against, and he is, as much as it looks like he's stepping out and going in. I think he's just following lads in because he's just so strong. So I think he needs to learn. I think I've said this to you on this podcast before. He's not patient enough in the scrum. And I think that's why when our subs come on and all their job is to do is just lock the thing out, they're fine. So when Healy and Clarkson and Herring come on, their only job is, especially in the scrum, is lock this out. We're not moving. Get the ball to the backs and let it have a nice strike move and do something good off it. We don't need to be winning penalties off every scrum. I think that's the big issue that Porter has. Finlay is playing the season of his life, the Six Nations. He did have that dip, even he said himself, in November by his own standards, but I think he's come to that point. He's come to that level where he's just doing really good. Like the three are going to play for the 70 minutes, like 65, 70 short of injury, So it's not really a worry. They're not worry. I don't worry about our front row, I worry in our set piece in terms of line out because we're going to be thrown to Peter Mahoney at the front. That's just what we're going to be doing. And that's why he's been selected at 6, and I'm not convinced by this Ryan Baird as a line out for operator as of yet. I think when you have Joe McCarthy starting, you are suddenly relying on Byrne and O'Mahony to jump. There's no other jumper in that pack. Like Doris isn't really a jumper. Van der Fleer isn't really a jumper. And the odd time McCarthy does jump, it just feels like, lads, this is taking an age to get up in the air. He has no spring. And, even though I think last week there was a lot more ball called onto him against Wales than I've seen in a very long time. So I think if you look at our starting 23 and the French 23, we're looking to finish with James Ryan and Ryan Baird, 2 jumpers. So McCarthy comes off, we gain a jumper. O'Mahony comes off, we don't lose another jumper, you know? So I think that's why those selections have been done in that way. It's very much how we're finishing the game over how we're starting the game. But I hope we just slim down our line out, get it, simplify our call a small bit, less silly buggers, get in, get up, get the ball down, and compete at the front against France. And if they want to throw long, let them throw long, you know, and then defend off that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think with McCarthy, what he brings around the park versus what he brings in the line are very different things. Like he doesn't bring a huge part in the lineup compared to, say, James Ryan. That's where O'Mahony becomes important. If Ireland are in a situation where Peter O'Mahony has to go 80 minutes again, they're in that situation. There's no going back. This is the risk you take, with potentially, two guys carrying knocks or whatever it may be. But we shall see. He's going to be so important. I think that's the thing. Like for all the talk of, the Swan Song game, hopefully we don't have any of those O2 banners like we did for Brian O'Driscoll back in the day. But for all the talk of it, Peter O'Mahony is still so important. Like that is the thing.
I'm just wondering, will there be like tweets like Dave Carney did about the cheer when he came on for Brian O'Driscoll that time? Like best cheer I've ever got in playing a jersey, playing for Ireland. No, but I think when you look at this match, you like from an Irish perspective, you do have the tactical, but there is the emotional side of that game, and it's what Ireland get right more often than not. Like before I go into the 3 in their swan song, it's Finlay Beanham's 50th cap. That will be a big thing in that camp and how they prep and how they talk about things. And then you go on to this is these 3 lads' final home game, and you work with those small little emotional bits. And this Irish team are very good at harnessing those emotional elements to get good performances. They don't get outrageously huge, fired up emotional performances, but they get very good focused emotional performances where everyone puts everything into every element of what they're doing. So I think announcing those 3 retirements and letting them have this swan song at home against France, Six Nations decider, there's those little things that the Irish camp are very good at utilizing. And I can see that giving the Ireland team the extra 5% that sometimes they've looked like they've needed this year.
And that's the thing. It could be absolutely massive because the French team will move on to it now. There's a 7-1 bench. It's not just the normal stuff. It's beloved by so many people. Like, I'm not speaking for you, I'm just speaking about myself here. But there's also a return for Damien Penaud. There's Gregory Aldridge fit enough to play. Thomas Ramos moves to fullback, and I'll start the team there with Damien Penaud, as I said, and Louis Bielbiari on the wings. Pierre-Louis Barassi and Yoram Moefana are in the centres, not second row, with a return of Dupont and Tamac at halfback. Jean-Baptiste Gros, Pietro Mavaca, and Winnie Antonio are the front row. Thibaut Flamand and Miguel Guillard are the second row, with Francois Crowe, Paul Boulahon, and Gregory Audrey in the back row. Complete tangent. I love Francois Crowe as a player, but we'll go into that a little bit later on. Julien Marchand, Sarah Bay, and Dorian Aldegheri are the replacement front row. And the rest of the 7 is Emmanuel Miafu, Hugo Ardu, Oscar Jegu, and Anthony Chalonge, with Maxime Lucu being the 1, as well as Jason Statham look-alike and everything in between. Illtud, we'll start with 7-1. We have to start there with that bench split. Didn't work for South Africa when they played Ireland, but it worked in the World Cup final. It worked for France the last day. It's a bold call, but fortune favours the brave sometimes in sport.
Yeah, it definitely is bold, and it worked against Italy. And before the Italy game, Fabian got to say that it's a risk. And this week he said again that it's a risk as well. And no risk, no reward. I guess it is a ballsy move, big time. Just because of if he gets any injuries in the back, so I don't have no idea what he will do. He likes the idea of trying on to do part 10. That's the impression we get because of the way they're playing as well, with trying to keep him a bit in the pocket and the pivot, so then he can keep his eyes out and have his eyes up, so his head's not stuck down like a scrum half. Yeah, but then that massive venture bit coming on to what you guys are saying there about the Irish front row coming on. If the starting front row does 60, 70 minutes, the French front row will do 45 max, and then bring on Le Baguette squad. I saw it mentioned somewhere. And yeah, it's the 7-1 split is a huge risk, but it worked for against Italy, and Galtier seems quite proud of it working against Italy, as if it's like his original idea. And if they do win on Saturday, then it'll probably be because of 7-1. If they lose, it probably will be because of 7-1 as well, just because how important that last half an hour could be. Yeah, so high risk, high reward. We'll see what happens.
And just aside from that, then, as I said, Ramos moves back to 15. It's Peno on the wing. It's Ntamack back, which of course we might get onto that in a second with the whole suspension malarkey or whatever you want to call it. For the changes France have made, what do you think there? Because to be fair, like Leo Barre, guys like that, they were all brilliant against Italy. But as you said, it is kind of Italy. Sometimes you just have to back the guys who've been there, done that. And Ramos, Peno, guys like that, they have done it even against Ireland.
Yeah, since the middle of the last Six Nations, I think Galtier's realised that he needs to ruffle a few feathers and drop some of his big names. He did that. I can't remember who did that to in the Six Nations, but then in November he did it to Gregory Aldrit and Charles Olivan, who were two former captains. And then this Six Nations, he's done it for Damien Penaud. He's done it quite a few times to Mathieu Jalibert, but we don't know if that's because of their weird power relationship or it's because he wants to test him. And yeah, those changes, Romain Ntamack was always going to come back in when he was available because he is Galtier's first choice 10, and then that means you move Thomas Ramos back to fullback. And it's unfortunate for Leo Barre, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. And Damien Penaud too, he's one try off Serge Blanco's scoring record for Ireland. Everyone thought he would definitely get it during the Six Nations because he'd probably score a hat-trick against Italy. Didn't even play. So we'll see if he gets it either against Ireland or against Scotland on the last day of the tournament as well. So yeah, they're pretty logical, all those decisions. The one doubt was Gregory Aldrit because he missed training on Tuesday, and on Wednesday he sat out wearing trainers, just sat aside the pitch, but then he spoke on Wednesday after the session. He said, "Yeah, I'm fine. It was the coach's decision. They didn't want to risk anything further," and he was named in the squad. But maybe don't rule out if he doesn't get through Friday's session properly. Maybe he might be a late pullout, which then causes a massive cat amongst the pigeons regarding 7-1, because on the reserves, the travelling reserves they've got Pierre Bougait, Tevita Tevaf, who are both front rowers, and then Nolan Legaric, Teo Atisogbe, and Nicolas Deportel. So they haven't got any extra back rowers within those travelling reserves, so they'd have to go to a 6-2 or a split there on the bench. So yeah, we'll see.
Reverting only to a 6-2 if there's a late change, as if it's some sort of archaic way to do things. But before we kind of move off France from a French perspective, Illtud, Roman Ntamack coming back in there with the whole kerfuffle about his ban versus Gary Ringrose's ban. I know you've probably been covering it and has seen it asked to players and coaches alike. What's the sense in France about that kind of discrepancy? Like we've all seen it, we understand why it's in place as it was, but what's the sentiment in France?
It's funny, Fabien Galtier said during the press conference after the team announcement that he wanted to be refereed fairly and equally on and off the field. So make that what you wish, where obviously you want on the field scrum time, lineouts, set piece, etc., but also off the field when it comes disciplinary. And he called it le corps arbitral, which is the arbitrary core. So you can open that out as much as you want, really. And he's miffed about it. The French Federation miffed about it. I'm sure Romain Ntamack's a bit annoyed about it as well, because it just lacks consistency at the end of the day. And it's understandable, but at the same time, it's a legal procedure. If you've got a lawyer who's smarter than another lawyer, then you can't really complain, can you? So yeah, and this is kind of in a wider context. This is maybe the French Federation seeing things a bit as not an anti-Franco bias, but more as a pro-Anglophone bias. And okay, you can speak Gaelic and Irish, you can speak Welsh in Wales, etc. But there is a certain perspective of things that if you're not from an Anglo-speaking country, you do get treated more unfairly at a World Rugby level. Look at what's happened to Spain in recent Rugby World Cups, where they've been suffered big time from discrepancies where other countries have done that in the past and they've had nothing, or definitely not such similar disciplinary decisions come down to them. And this is what happened with Romain Ntamack. But hey, Ireland, the RFU, Leinster, Gary Ringrose, somebody's through all that little bit smarter, and they've got away with it.
And that's the thing. Like, it's whether you agree with or not with tackle school, 20-minute red cards, how rugby has this kind of a great word for the arbitrary kind of way of doing things is irrelevant. Like, France have some right to be peeved off, especially when the findings of the case found that Ireland sent an email to Leinster 2 days after the match saying that Gary Ringles would have played for Leinster. The three Irish lads, just to use us on this call specifically, we all know Gary Ringles was not going to play against Cardiff. Like, and we all know we had a better chance of playing against Cardiff at the weekend, like injuries beside. But it's just the kind of the moving it around. Like, I do believe that Gary Ringles' hearing went on from 9 a.m. in the morning to like 6 p.m. in the evening. It was reported here in Ireland. So they definitely tried every last exhaustive measure. And then, without being disrespectful to Italy, all that just to be back for the Italy game. He was always going to miss the French game. It almost feels like a bit of an irrelevance, and I mean that with respect. But back to the on-field action, and Erica, I'll start with yourself. France can hurt Ireland. You mentioned the pace factor, especially when you look at someone like Louis Bielbieri, who can run rings around most sprinters. The pack, the 7-1. If you're in Fabien Galtier's shoes, what are you looking at from Ireland and saying that's the point of weakness?
I think you're looking at where Sam Prendergast is standing in the defensive line, and you're looking to attack that immediately. Um, like Ireland, don't get me wrong, like, I mean, Ireland have a very high floor in terms of we've had games that we've played very, very badly in, and we've still gone on to win. And that Wales game was a key example of that. Like, probably the worst performance I've seen from an Ireland team in a long time, against probably, now admittedly the new coach bounce and everything like that, but like probably the worst team I've seen in the Six Nations since some of those Italy teams, since I think Italy had Kelly Haimona playing at 10. But to me, it's all about stress testing that Irish defence, and in particular the compression that happens around Prendergast because of effectively the minding that has to go on around his tackling technique. Like, you see him in the defensive line, he's always set up with Bundy Aki or Caelan Doris or Josh van der Fleer pretty much on his hip, because unfortunately with guys tackling technique, 9 times out of 10 he ends up being a bit of a speed bump. I think am I right in saying that he has the highest or second highest number of missed tackles in the tournament so far this season?
Highest, yeah, just ahead of famed defender Alex Mitchell. So not exactly ideal.
So I think what's going to happen, like if I'm Fabien Galtier, what I'm looking for is like sub 2 second ruck ball, which was always such a characteristic of Ireland's game when we were a more on ball team. And I think I'm looking to kind of hit that compression around Prendergast and then get a ball out wide to the likes of BLBRE or Damien Penault. Because the thing about BLBRE, he'll run past you. Damien Penault will run through you. And that is the concern that I would have, is that France are going to kind of like force us to compress in the center and then attack our edges. And there's only so much hiding you can do with Prendergast in defence. Like, Ireland's in games so far in this tournament have tended to hide him on defence and set pieces. He was on the blindside wing for one of Ireland's lineouts against Wales. He was out in the 13 channel at one point as well. So I think it's all about how quickly can France recycle ruck ball. And I think that's where it's key to see the likes of, say, Doris or Van der Fleer and even O'Mahony back in the team. And I think potentially that's probably why McCarthy is starting ahead of James Ryan as well, because he's seen as a big physical spoiler in the ruck ball. Now, the other tendency about Joe McCarthy is Joe McCarthy tends to value physicality over accuracy, and that can sometimes result in giving away silly penalties for not rolling away, or like not like hands on the ball when the ruck has been formed. But I just to come back to your initial point, and I think that's where having Entamac back in the team is so important for France, because he's such an excellent distributor, and not only that he is a running threat in and of his own right. Like, with all due respect to Thomas Ramos, he was never going to make a 20-meter break in the center of the pitch from an offload from Dupont. Neither probably was Jalibert against England, but Entamac offers that threat off of Dupont's shoulders that France's options up to now haven't really offered. And I think if you're Galtier, you have to look at targeting that compression early doors, sub 2 second ruck, a long floating Dupont pass, probably out to someone like Barassi, or even, if Penault rather is lurking on the blindside wing, getting that long looping pass out to him as well. And I think France are probably going to try and stress our edges early doors.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And it's kind of almost shame on us that we've gone this long without mentioning how important Antoine Dupont is. Because as much as you can look at it on one side and say, Antoine Dupont, when he's played in Dublin against Leinster and against Ireland and that one time against Munster, has been okay. They've had a specific game plan for him and he's had a mixed bag. But this is a different Irish team. This is a different Irish team to what would have played in Marseille last year, for instance. A very different team, defensively in particular, because obviously the Crowley versus Prendergast, and even say Nash versus Osborne. It'd be interesting to see how Osborne defends on the right hand side. Is it kind of like the old soccer thing that defending at right back and left back are two entirely different positions? That'll be one that'll be interesting to see. But Pádraig, we have to mention Dupont because if anyone can compress Ireland around the fringes and to get those one-on-ones, like what Wales managed to get in the second half, or well, the middle third of the game, I suppose, in Cardiff, it is Dupont because he is, again, Antoine Dupont. He needs no introduction. So how do you? I'm not going to say how important is he. He's massive, but just how big of a factor do you think he will be in this game in the end?
I think if there isn't at least 4 moments where kind of going, Jesus, how the hell do you do that? Because at the end of the day, you can defend Dupont and this French team not easily because they're very good, but with patience. You have to almost let Dupont take that step, have that look, and not rush him too much. You want to put that is that there's that split difference between a drift defense and a rush defense in that gap to defend against Dupont. And that's where, say, like Italy gave Dupont far too much time, so he was able to literally pick out stupid passes and cross kicks. He was able to do whatever he wanted in that game. But if you rush him, he has the physical strength to just step or hand off and go. So it's living in that patience of he's going to tempt the Irish defense to come at him to cause a gap or someone to shoot. And that's where he's at his most dangerous, where that kick is a that's too long. That ruck is super fast and he can just take that extra step and kind of go, who's going to come to me? Who's going to let me make a decision that I want to make? Whereas if you can let him play his game 5 meters behind the gain line, don't rush him too much, but start to cut off options for him. That's when I think this whole thing of get him on the ground, scragging him doesn't actually work because he's too strong. He can hand you off. He can just shrug you off. But it's living in that gap of being a drift defense and a shooting defense. If you can marry that perfectly, which requires patience, which requires discipline, you have the chance to stop Dupont doing stupid Dupont things. He's always going to do them. He's always going to have these incredible magic moments. You can't stop a player having like Dupont having those moments, but you can limit them. And I think that's what Ireland will have to try and do, is limit the amount of impact he can have. And it's in that defensive thing where he'll do it the most. I think they're going to try and get to the edge as quickly as possible, like Wales did. They're going to look for Sam. I think Ireland won't do what they did against Wales and hide him on the wings. I think they're going to bait France, put Sam in next to Bundy, and keep them thinking that's the weak point and ignore the wings as much as possible. Because the second you put Sam on the wing, I'd rather Sam be a speed bump in the center with Bundy next to him than facing B. Barry on the wing. So it's where you're looking at the strengths of France and these incredibly strong carriers. And what you want to do is bait them to kind of keep going down that central channel. And I think Sam's going to will be bait right there in the middle, no more than Antoine Dupont will try and bait the Irish defense up. We're going to go, no, you keep carrying in tight. We're going to slow you down here with Bundy and Doris and Van der Fleer. Like, don't get me wrong, the guys like Movaka, Antonio, Flamand, they're all huge carriers. Like Aldrit, especially with that space, he's an incredible carrier of the ball. And that's what France want to do, just soften us up so they can unleash 7 more in the second half. That's what they're going to want to do. And then in the last 20, try and get wide and do the serious damage. This is literally punch. They're going to try and get us punch drunk with really strong carrying and then release the back three who should still be fit and firing and have all the legs in the world to keep running and doing all that. This game will be won the last 10 minutes. That's where this game will be won and lost. For me, though, I worry about the French centre partnership, because if you look at that Italy match, and like Brex, don't get me wrong, like the Italian centre partnership could be the best centre partnership in the world, and they made hay against this in attack against the French centre partnership. I think that's where Ireland will aim their strike moves of trying to pull the Mofana and Louis Barisi apart a small bit, just to see can they cause those same issues that Italy did. And we're going to try, and that'll be at the King game and offset piece. But yeah, it's going to be a great game, lads. And stopping Dupont is only one element of it. France like to kick long. They have the pace to put pressure on. It's the speed of the back three which worries me the most, especially Biarri, because he is a one-man, half an inch, there's a try. He can score tries on his own. And that's where France have the 2 points of difference, really, is Dupont and that incredible pace out wide.
There's something a little bit reminiscent of how we previewed the England game to how we're previewing this, insofar as we expected England to almost not shut up shop. I don't want to say anything like that or park the bus, but work their socks off for 60 minutes, 50 minutes, and then bring on the big guys and hope that they could then overpower Ireland, as because Ireland were, before the Six Nations, very slow at using their bench. I think now it's France are just going to try and use every bit of ball they have. It's going to be so important that Ireland kick accurately. For all the talk of 50-22s and spirals and whatever else, Ireland have kicked mixed in this championship. I think it's fair to say, like, they've had some brilliant moments from, say, Gibson Park, Lowe, Osborne, Prendergast, and some poor ones. They need to be super, super accurate. They will need to be incredibly rigid in defence. I think, and this is not trying to kick a man when he's down, I am more comfortable with Robbie Henshaw at 13 than Gary Ringrose in general, because I just think Robbie's physicality off the edge. You can have the greatest defensive system in the world, but when you've got a player of Robbie Henshaw's size hitting you on the outside shoulder, it's very hard to generate fast ball from there. He's an incredibly tough guy to defend, to attack against. Ireland need to be smart. And if France do get into the ascendancy, if France are in this game and humming going into halftime, knowing they've got 7-4 spring off the bench, a lot of freshness, even more carrying threat, especially with like Marchand and Bailly and Meafu and Chalont, more carrying threat off the bench. That's when you start to get worried. We will see.
Just
go on, Pádraig. Yeah.
I was actually a question for Illtud. It's like, if France get 2 injuries in the back line, who goes in? Like, how do you reshuffle if there's a second injury in the back line? We'll say Penaud goes injured or one of the centers goes injured. How does that shuffle work, do you think? What back will be sacrificed, forward will be sacrificed to the wing? That's for you, yeah?
Yeah, so one of the plans potentially, originally when he spoke about doing a 6-2 split for the first time a year ago, it was Paul Boudin would move to midfield, and maybe Johan Moefana would go to the wing, where Johan Moefana has played quite a lot of his 35 odd caps on the wing. And then with Oscar Jégou coming in as well, he's also an option in midfield and on the wing as well. So those are the 2 options. I can't say they're very experienced in those positions. I can't say I've ever seen them play those positions, but those are the possibilities. I don't think they'll be very comfortable. And I think Fabien Galtier is praying tonight, and he'll pray tomorrow night that he doesn't have to do that. So yeah, those are the possibilities. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens. I'm not too confident in them, and I don't think Fabien Galtier is either. So maybe that's a point of weakness that Ireland can hope for as well.
That's a little bit disappointing. I was kind of hoping to hear Peter Mavaka would be going into 12 because,
he wants to. He definitely wants to. He finished the game at 8 in November, and he's keen as mustard to play different positions. He loves playing rugby. Yeah, why not? Give him a go, especially if they're leading. But
I'm actually, if I can just jump in with another question for Illtud here as well, because I'm just very curious. We obviously live within the Irish media bubble. And it's fair to say, like, that the key difference in the Irish 23 between now and, say, Marseille last year is the change at out half. And just given Ireland's performances so far this season, like I'm curious, like what is, if any, like the French perspective on Ireland's, or the perspective of the French media on Ireland's change at 10? Because of course, you had that mid-all team of the week where Crowley was selected at 10 despite only coming on for the last 25 minutes against England. And I'm just curious, like, what is the French perception of this Irish team?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they definitely respect. You can't deny that. And Sam Prendergast within the media, I think definitely people see him as a weakness. Fabian Galthy was asked this week, "What do you think of Ireland?" and then also, "What do you think of Prendergast?" And without even mention a negative side of it, of Prendergast's defensive abilities, he goes, "He's definitely not a weak link. Prendergast is definitely not a weak link." So within the squad, I think they realize how much of a quality player is. But then I think within the media, like everyone who's really watched it realizes how potentially weak he is, and how if you just look at his body, he seems to still have a teenager body. He hasn't built his manhood body yet. Look at the side, and his arms are quite skinny still, But that'll come over time, and even by the time the next World Cup comes around, he'll have filled out a little bit more, and he'll be a different sort of physical presence. But defensively, yeah, he does get caught out. Especially he got caught out against Wales for the time Rogers tried with Blair Murray, who just skipped around him like he wasn't even there. And that was when he was defending a 13 channel. So then what damage could someone like Johan Moefana do if he's in the 12 channel as well? So yeah, there's definitely respect and appreciative of Prendergast's talent, and especially kicking. But defensively, everyone realizes that he's got progress to make.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely fair. Like I know if this video or that segment pops off on YouTube, will be people saying no, that's unfair. But like every single player, including Antoine Dupont in this list, and Sia Khaleesi, has weaknesses. Like it should be okay to analyze. Like Andrew Porter, I think, and I think Eric and Pádraig will agree with me on this. Andrew Porter is insanely talented as a rugby player. Doesn't mean he's a perfect scrummager. He's just an insanely talented rugby player. But that whole, again, to use the term culture war, and all that aside, I do think there is elements of Sam's game, of say Jamie Osborne's game, of the bench with like Clarkson, Healy, Herring, Ryan Baird. There are weaknesses there for Ireland. The question is whether France can actually get at them, because they haven't managed to do so consistently over the last few years. Eric, I'll let you go first with the predictions. The bookies have this as 1 point. So that's basically them saying, I don't care which way you go. Then make up your own mind. It's going to be incredibly tight. The atmosphere will be whatever the atmosphere is going to be because it's Dublin. How do you see it going? Why do you see it going that way?
It's funny that they have it as 1 point, considering that in the last 2 years it's been won by two scores, and in both cases or at least two scores, and in both cases by Ireland. I don't know is the honest answer to that question, because I feel like sometimes there's a bit of like Cassandra going on, in the sense that people are saying, you fools, this is the game where Sam Prendergast is going to get found out, and Mo Fana is going to run through him for 3 tries. But as I said to you off air, Kaelon, like, the weaknesses in players are not a problem until they are. And that's the thing. It's like, if you can compensate for, and getting Peter O'Mahony to get Andrew Porter to keep his elbow up, or, if you can compensate for those deficiencies that exist within players, you'll win the game. And I come back to that point again, that Ireland are a team that has an incredibly high floor. Whatever about their ceiling, like the level, just the baseline level of quality that they've built up in the last number of years is astounding. And am I right in saying that the only team the only two sides they've lost international rugby games to in the last 2.5 years are England and New Zealand? No, South Africa as well.
Once
Sorry, we
South
lost
Africa,
we
yeah.
lost that test down in. Sorry, I thought I had a really profound point to make, and then it just went out the window with facts. Actually, I think coming back to kind of my uncertainty around the prediction, Boric highlighted the inconsistency that Ireland's lineout is facing. And I genuinely think that, like, Wales were unfortunately just trying to build up so much ground from a really poor start that we were able to work around our set piece being that poor. I think if our lineout is that poor against France, we're not going to get away with it. I think if our lineout and our scrum are both as poor as they were against Wales, then we haven't a hope in hell of winning that game. I do think, though, and I think to tap back to another point that Pádraig made, Ireland are very good at tapping into the emotion of events. Like all of the coverage, I would imagine, pre-game and everything like that is going to be around like this is the last time you're going to get to see Conor Murray, Cian Healy, and Peter O'Mahony in an Ireland jersey in Lansdowne Road. And I think that's going to play such a crucial. You would hope anyway, although I am never hopeful about the atmosphere in Lansdowne Road. You would hope that that will kind of get the crowd into the game. You would hope that will get the lads into the game. But I'm going to give you a kind of a real milquetoast answer, and I'm going to say if Ireland's set piece, like if Ireland's line-out completion rate is north of 80%, I think we'll win. I think if our set piece has another bad day at the office, I think we'll struggle, and I think France will win. And funnily enough, I do think it's going to be one of those games where it's not a one-score game. I think it's going to be one or more score. I think it's going to be more than one score on either side, depending on whoever wins it. I think these are just two wrecking balls of teams that crash into each other. And I think when one gets the ascendancy, they tend to pull away.
No, I can definitely see that. And just on your line-out point, I went in to check it because Ireland's line in 2023 Six Nations was very ropey at the time. Ireland went 8 from 11 that day, got the job done. But there was an awful lot of moving parts. That game was one of the great Six Nations games that you've seen. I don't think Ireland can get away with that again, especially considering that something we haven't talked about either. This is France with a bit of a vengeance. They've lost twice in a row to Ireland. They lost that big curtain raiser in Marseille last time around. You know, they blew it in Twickenham. Like, plain and simply, they absolutely blew that game in Twickenham. Illtud, you're on the ground. You've been in Marcoussis and spoken to players and coaches. As a neutral, as you said at the top of the show, you're probably hope for a big game. But how do you see it going? Who do you see winning this one?
I have no idea. I don't know. And I've been thinking all week of how this is going, like who's got the ascendancy where, like it's just impossible. I had a chat with Sean Edwards for a piece I'm doing next week with him. It will come out next week, and I tried to get some insiders off him, like off the record, and I tried to get an impression of how he's feeling. I just asked him off the cuff, like, "You boys will be all right on the weekend," and he just looked really stone cold, as in, obviously he looks like Stone Cold Steve Austin, but there he looked he didn't want to give anything away, and we'd been speaking for half an hour, and he was really good to speak to. But for that moment, he was like, "No, nothing." So I was just like, "Okay, this is big boy test rugby, you know." And sadly, it might come down to weaknesses. Sadly, it might come down to some refereeing decisions. But I'm just hoping to see France have a go, and also hoping to see what Ireland can do to react to that, especially out wide in the long range kicking game. Hopefully it's a good game. And Eric's point is quite fair, actually. Like, these two teams, once they get the ascendancy, they just go and they keep rolling and they keep rolling, and then they win, like France did against Italy. So yeah, I'll sit on the fence, and that's not because I'm biased. I just really can't call it. Sorry.
If you're going to sit in the fence, I'll throw another question at you. Is this the biggest game that these two sides have played since the World Cup then? Because if it is, Ireland had essentially a Grand Slam decider in Twickenham last year, didn't win that. They had a very good chance to win Pretoria, didn't win that. Now, obviously they won in Durban. I'm not taking away from that. They won in Dublin the week after Twickenham. They had this massive, autumn opener against New Zealand, a revenge game. Didn't win that. For France, on the other hand, no one has talked about France in the last 2 years and not mentioned the World Cup quarterfinal against South Africa. So do you think there's a huge amount of pressure on these two teams that we're not mentioning because we're talking about swan songs and Entamac and referees and James Lowe's toe being in touch last time, which we can all agree now was in touch at the time?
It's definitely the biggest game since the World Cup, because both of them had the same experience of losing in a quarterfinal, when if they'd won the quarterfinal, they probably would have got to the final, and they probably would have, one of them would have won it. So yeah, it is probably the biggest game, yeah, definitely. But I don't think it's that big of a thing. Bizarrely, a lot of the British press I've listened to are mainly English press, London-based. They're saying that Galtie's under pressure. I've heard Hugo Monia saying, yeah, he's under massive pressure at home. But from what I'm speaking to him, literally the horse's mouth, and other journalists, and reading stuff and speaking to fans, like people realize that okay, this nations, it's massive, it's great, it would be fantastic for this golden generation of France players to win another title, but they also have the bigger context of they realize how painful it was to lose in the World Cup quarter final, and the World Cup in 2027 is a far bigger deal for the Six Nations. So yeah, it's not the seminal moment for France, but it's an important step towards the World Cup, and winning in Dublin, where Ireland have lost only twice since 2019, as Fabien Galtier said, I mentioned earlier, would be quite a big statement to make.
It would be sizable. Pádraig, I'll let you go next. We have one person solely on defense, another person mainly on defense. Are you gonna come join the Irish fans looking for a bit of optimism and just give them what they want?
Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a draw. No, but I was putting notes together, and I actually felt really weird typing one thing I said earlier on, and to myself, like, what France is going to show up, and it feels like this Six Nations we can, especially with that English, like, are we going to get the France that had Butterfingers against England, or are we going to get the France that went complete RoboCop Terminator mode against Italy? Like, I'm hoping it's the previous, but it's like what, and it's only this Six Nations because France haven't been playing to their ability either as Ireland, and that's why this game is incredibly fascinating, because if both teams play to their ability and to the execution level that they both can do, we should be looking at one of the best games of rugby we'll see this year. Yes, like, people can have their own personal opinion about kicking and everything like that, but like, which will be a major factor. I don't see this game being won before the 70th minute. If we're looking at that game at 70 minutes and like we kind of know who's won the game, I'll be shocked. I think it's going to be decided in the last 10 minutes. I don't think there'll be more than one score in it. I know it's been won by 2 scores the last 2 years, but Ireland's floor is higher, but we're aiming more at our floor than our ceiling at the moment when in our performances. And France just have that ability to just do one. I'm going to go Ireland by 3 or 4. I think it's going to be a converted try or a penalty or something like that. I think it's going to be the home factor. It'll be those elements that will get Ireland over the line more than how they play, if that makes any sense or shape or form. They're going to drag themselves over the line and get into more than blow France away. If France win, it'll be by 10, if that makes sense. It's either Ireland by 3 or France by 10. There's no in between. But I'm gonna go with Ireland by 3 more than France by 10.
I struggle, and I wasn't listening to Fabien Galtier when I came up with this. I struggle to see Ireland losing at home generally. It's the safe bet. Ireland at home, they tend to win, same as France at home. I do believe that this Irish team isn't as strong as they were last year. I think that's absolutely fine. I actually think probably 5 of the Six Nations are probably weaker than they were this time last year, because that's what can happen in sport. Not a lot of evolution and so forth. It's going to be incredibly tough for Ireland, this one. I can see France struggling because they have struggled against Ireland. They are there. I think Harry Jones had the little graphic where it's like Ireland beat France, France beat New Zealand, New Zealand beat Ireland, South Africa, Ireland, fair enough, back and forth, but mainly Ireland, South Africa beat France, and so on and so forth. And kind of like the old Leinster La Rochelle thing, actually, to circle back to that, and Toulouse. I think it's going to be very tough for Ireland. I'll let you jump in there 2 seconds there, because I look at, it's not the 7-1. The 7-1 actually doesn't scare me. It's Penot, Bielbiari, Ntamack, Dupont. I think that back row, I think on form right now, Porter, Sheehan, and Beelum, to their credit, all make the French pack. After that, Van der Fleer, like the French pack has been playing really, really well. Francois Crowe's been playing really well for a while. Flamand, if you didn't know this, once played 10 at Loughborough University for their thirds, I think it was, or whatever it was. They're such a tough team to beat. They mightn't click on the day, but if they do, and this is kind of the fear factor. I raised this with, I think it was Paul in the preview, with like the European competitions. If they click, I don't think Ireland has that gear. I think, to Eric's point, Ireland have a very high floor. I do not see Ireland bombing out of this game. But if they have to chase it, if at 50 minutes, like that England game where they had to go up a gear, they had to find something. France for me are a better team than England, despite that result. I'll go with Ireland, but I would be a lot less confident than I was even for Marseille last year, where I actually thought France would win it, but not by a lot. It's a coin toss. I think I think we're all okay to say that. Eric, I'll let you get the closing word there before we go.
The one factor that I did just want to highlight that we haven't talked about is Angus Gardner as referee. And I think there are two main factors that come into play there. Number one, Gardner in his performances, I would argue, historically tends to favour the home team, and tends to make a lot of the drama or narrative calls. And I think that most kind of infamously came to the fore in Shizuoka in 2019. But the other thing I would say about Gardner, and this is kind of a typical characteristic of a lot of Southern Hemisphere refs, is that they tend to let a lot go in the breakdown. So I think a lot of Ireland's more nefarious tactics in the breakdown probably won't go as heavily penalised as they would have been in previous games. And I think coming back to that initial point of like, where will France target Ireland and what do you need to stop? I think that will suit Ireland in terms of their game plan to disrupt the sub 2 second ruck that France will likely be aiming for in this case. But I think, as much as we don't want to say it on the regular, like particularly at these levels, officials, given that there is a limited pool of officials to choose from at this high level, they do have their styles. It is possible to analyze them, and they do ultimately, in terms of how they choose to referee games, have impact on how games are played. And I don't think you can ignore the Gardner factor when potentially assessing this result.
No, I'd agree. And like, referees are important. Law interpretations are important. We spoke about that earlier with like Osborne and Keenan and so forth. And even the fact that, Dupont has got Entmac back with them for this game with those new laws around touching the line, and you can only do a certain amount. Like Tadhg has basically come out and said it has nullified some of my game. Like, will Dupont have a little bit more of a field day without Tadhg's blue scrum caps chasing him around the place? We don't know. We'll wait and see. I wish I was going to be there because I like Antrim Dupont. I like Tadhg. That would be just something to watch in and of itself. But gentlemen, we'll leave it at that. My thanks to Illtud, Pádraig, and Eric for joining me tonight for, it looks like a championship decider. It probably will be a championship decider. If it's not, that means we've got an unbelievable contest between Scotland and France to come next weekend. You can watch this one on Saturday afternoon from 2:15 on RT2 and ITV. That's if you're not there, of course. We'll be back on Sunday with a review of the 3 senior games as well as the under-20s clash with Les Bleus down in Musgrave Park. As always, if you'd like to see here and want to join us for the final 2 weeks of the championship as well as the women's Six Nations coming in the next 3 weeks, subscribe on all good platforms. You can find all the links to my channels below. But for now, until next time, chat Sunday and take it easy.